Peerless only existed between 1900 and 1931, but their high-quality automobiles meant that they were included with Packard and Pierce Arrow as the three Ps of American automotivedom, in spite of advancing innovations that later became standard on other autos, such as drum brakes and the first enclosed body production car. Like many others, they eventually fell victim to the Great Depression. But unlike others, they didn't try to fight through it. They literally just gave up and moved on to other products. Welcome back to All Cars Y'all. I am John, and this is a far too brief history of Peerless. Peerless dates back to 1869 in Cincinnati as a manufacturer of clothespins, washboards, and clothes wringers. They merged with the Mercantile Manufacturing Company in Cleveland and became Peerless Wringer and Manufacturing Company in 1889, and by 1892 they were the Peerless Manufacturing Company when they moved locations, jumped into the bicycle boom, and began building bikes. And then they began eyeing the growing interest in the horseless carriages by the 1900s. They were manufacturing automobiles and parts by 1901 and renamed as Peerless Motor Car in 1902. Also in 1902, the company snagged Louis P. Moores as an experienced engineer and auto designer to work on their first completely new automobile to be branded as a Peerless. To achieve success and notoriety, they built cars for races and quickly licensed De Dion Bouton engines for four-wheeled motorettes and three-wheeled tricycles, with a two-cylinder single-throw crankshaft for an early rear-wheel drive model, being one of the very first companies to mount the engine in the front. The company produced 90 autos in 1902 and 400 in 1903. Ranging in price from $2,800 to $11,000, they were the most costly touring car built in America. By 1904, a 60-horsepower four-cylinder Peerless was created for racing that became known as the Green Dragon, helping solidify the company's reputation for quality. It was entered in the world's first 24-hour endurance race in Ohio, which it led until crashing into a fence. But it still finished third. In the early Glidden tours of long-distance racing, they achieved perfect scores in 1906 through 1908 and also set a 1,000-mile endurance and speed record in the Mount Washington hill climb. Between 1905 and 1910, the company expanded rapidly and focused increasingly on luxury. In 1906, they purchased a site for a new facility. Throughout the 1910s, they expanded their models from the four-cylinder 30-horsepower Model 27 and six-cylinder 50-horsepower Model 28 up to the 5.4-liter V8 Model 56 of 1917. In this period, they were the first to use a flyball governor to maintain speeds, the first to use a hinged steering wheel to allow easier access to the driver, and the first to use a closed formal body in American production. They were amongst the first to use electric lighting as early as 1910, and by 1913 included an electric starter in many models and used cast aluminum panels. In 1912, a new six-cylinder T-head was introduced with 7 main bearings and dual ignition, as well as their venerable four-cylinder T-head with about 25 horsepower. In 1912, their catalog included a 415 cubic inch engine rated at 38 horsepower, a 578 cubic inch engine rated at nearly 50, and an 825 cubic inch engine at an amazing 60 horsepower. But those figures are probably drastically underestimated. They produced 1,700 vehicles in 1912 and 3,000 in 1913. In spite of growing confidence and expanding their manufacturing, sales fell in 1914 to just 647. In 1915, the company merged with General Vehicle Company of New York and became Peerless Truck and Motor, and around this time also offered their first V8 engine to compete with Cadillac, a 5.4-liter L-head making around 80 horsepower. Also around this time, they changed from offering vehicles to the wealthy to focus on medium-priced cars, and production ultimately increased to about 7,400 in 1915. During World War I, the company supplied trucks and chassis, and notably, the Peerless armored car. By 1919, their constantly updated factory that had been very advanced at conception was horribly out of date and inefficient. In 1921, the company was sold to Detroit interests headed by former president and GM of Cadillac, Richard Collins. Collins profited handsomely, personally, including a $150,000 a year salary, and managed to alienate the stockholders. He was forced out in 1923, by which time the company had a $1 million deficit. By 1925, the company had a profit of $3 million, and by 1928, Cleveland investors regained control of the company. In 1929, the entire Peerless lineup was redesigned to compete with the new vehicles by Stutz and Marmon, as their new president, James Bohannon, was a former president of Marmon. In a bit of gimmickry, they refreshed the lineup in 1930 with designs by Russian designer Count Alexis de Sakhanovsky, and sales increased slightly. At some point, their V8 was replaced with a 5.3 Continental Straight 8, making about 114 horsepower up to about 120 to save costs, but the Great Depression began to hit the industry. They attempted to simplify their lineup and production to appeal to the wealthy, and in 1930, they sold 3,642 vehicles, beating Lincoln. But Peerless's focus on conservative design built for decades of ownership left them facing stiff competition for more attractive offerings from LaSalle, Packard, and the Studebaker President Series. With the wealthy being hit by the Depression, sales eroded. In 1930 or 31, the company created a V16 prototype in conjunction with the Aluminum Company of America, we would know that as Alcoa, that they envisioned to be their 1933 model, an advanced and attractive offering with possibly a coupe, roadster, and convertible bodies going to be available. The main designer was a 22-year-old named Franklin Hershey of Murphy Coach Works. Finished in 1931, its 7.6-liter engine made nearly 175 horsepower, with bodywork by Murphy on a 145-inch wheelbase. They only made 4, with 2 of them having aluminum frames, and it was the last Peerless produced before they closed in 1932, and yet they never went into production. In 1931, after selling just 1,145 cars, they decided to cease production of automobiles. The business was idled, and to help keep the company afloat and forecasting the end to Prohibition, they applied to the Brewing Company of Canada for the American rights to brew Carling's Black Label beer and Red Cap Ale. In 1933, Carling Brewing Company was formed and operated out of the old Peerless factory. That portion of the company prospered, and by 1954, they changed their name to Carling Brewing Company and expanded to 6 other plants across the nation. They used the old Peerless factory until 1971, when it was transferred to C. Schmidt & Sons and continued operating until 1984. One thing that jumps out at me about Peerless is the complete lack of passion. While other manufacturers of the time, like Auburn Cord, Duesenberg, or Studebaker, that had family names associated with them, they had passion about their vehicles. Peerless comes across truly as just a product, just an appliance that they were selling for a return on investment. While they briefly competed with the best of the best, by the 1920s, changing ownership meant that there was stock manipulation to get the most money out of the company to enrich the shareholders and the executives, while design evolved slowly but was left behind, with more beautiful vehicles being sold by their competitors. This is a largely forgotten brand that produced exceptional autos, but was hamstrung by controlling interests being interested in nothing more than that return on investment. Oh, that young designer Franklin Hershey, he later worked at GM for Cadillac and Opel, and afterwards he moved to Ford, where he designed the Thunderbird. And Count de Sakhanovsky, well, he did designs for Auburn and Cord, American Bantam, Packard, and was working with Preston Tucker on a new car design before Tucker's passing. Thanks for being here, and thanks to my Patreons. If you support histories like this, reviews, and independent news opinions, please consider supporting this channel, and you might consider clicking on this history of Packard right here. Right here. Do it now. Thanks for being here, y'all.